Hello, my highly sensitive souls. Welcome back to the Sensitivity Doctor. This is Dr. Amelia Kelley, and today I have an awesome conversation for you with Emmi Fortin, who is a breakup and relationship coach who has been featured in everything from Katie Couric, Newsweek, and Cosmopolitan. She is not only a wealth of information, but compassion, and we dug into so many things about breakups. And this is an especially tricky time of year. I know this episode is coming out around day, which can be kind of a loaded holiday for some people. And this is whether or not you're in or out of a relationship, honestly. But we touch on things like getting over the ick, dating yourself, how to date again after a breakup, how highly sensitives can struggle sometimes to recover from breakups, and how it can take them longer. You learn a little bit about her dating history, a little about my dating history. So it's a really candid but honest conversation. There's so many good pieces in this episode. So give yourself a Valentine's Day gift. Sit back, relax, check in with yourself, and enjoy the episode. I'm so excited to have you here. It's always fun when you kind of connect through the different platforms and different places when you have similar interests as someone. So I was thrilled to connect with you and happy to have you here.
And I appreciate that you reached out to me because I got to read more about highly sensitive people. I mean, I had heard the term, but I hadn't ever really kind of looked into it. And so I found oh, wow, I actually identify with a lot of these things. So
awesome. Well, I can't wait to unpack that. That's honestly one of my favorite parts of having these conversations because a big mission for me in my work, and honestly, the whole point of the podcast is to get the word out and to have it be something that everyone knows about, because whether you're highly sensitive or not, I think just even understanding how we all tick and how we are different and then kind of like the needs of each other is so helpful for good relationships and conflict resolution, which is really right up your alley because I know you're here today to talk about relationships. Specifically, I was curious about how people can navigate and recover from breakups. This episode is going to come out as a Valentine's Day gift for my listeners.
okay, wonderful.
And really is a point that Valentine's can be tough. Sometimes you're in a loving relationship, sometimes you're in a relationship that's not so loving, and sometimes not in one at all. And having this whole holiday around it can be a lot. So could you start by introducing yourself, a little bit about your work, and what really makes you interested in talking about navigating things like breakups and relationships?
Sure. My name is Emmi Fortin, and I'm a breakup and relationship coach. And so essentially that means I help people heal their hearts and also rebuild a foundation, a really strong foundation in themselves, so that they can get really clear about how they want to move forward in this kind of newer reality that they either maybe wanted or didn't want. And so it's all about coming to a place of acceptance and really thinking about what do I want my life to look like moving forward and what little tiny steps can I continue to take consistently in order to make that happen.
I like how you said what the reality that they may or may not have wanted.
For sure. I mean, it's really, really hard when you are the person kind of on the receiving end, because as far as the people that I've worked with, a lot of them say that they were blindsided by someone wanting to break up with them or end even like a 30-year marriage. Or, maybe you were cheated on and so then you're blindsided there. But, it can be equally as hard to break up with someone because you might love that person, you don't want to hurt them. And it's really hard to make that kind of final decision of how you want to move forward with your life, knowing that it's going to impact the person that you have cared for.
So when you and I were first connecting today, we were talking about how you had not necessarily done much reading prior on HSPs, but now have since I reached out to you. I'm curious, first and foremost, did you find out if you are one?
So I didn't take an actual test, but a lot of the things that were being highlighted, I do resonate with. So I think there's a very high potential that I could be or have the characteristics of one for sure.
So when you think about the idea of navigating a breakup, but then being someone who is even more sensitive necessarily to emotions and deep connection, how would you take what you've been doing or what you normally do? And actually, maybe that's a good place to get started too. How do you help someone start navigating this? Like, what are your first steps as a coach?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's really can be a time of chaos. It can be a time of deep grieving. And so to kind of get a handle on the stress that someone might be feeling when they're going through this time, I think the very for first and foremost important step is what I call restore. I have kind of like a three-step process. And so the first phase is what I call restore, which is just all about reconnecting with yourself. And so, especially for a highly sensitive person, that's going to look like taking plenty of time to allow yourself to feel your emotions, to identify what your emotions even are. And even though it feels really uncomfortable and frankly horrible sometimes, it is an important step of the grieving process and of just the kind of inner awakening as well. Because when you suppress these things, you don't really allow yourself to do any exploration. So, reconnecting with yourself is not just in your mind, it's also involving your body in the process, which I think is a really big portion that a lot of people leave out because it's so easy to get caught up in the repetitive thoughts that are just like a broken record playing when you're going through a breakup. It's really important to involve movement in your everyday life and preferably something that makes you feel happy and joyful.
I mean, it makes sense to me when you consider that like trauma and strong emotions they can become stuck emotions in the body. So if you were to do something like make it a point to move your body, that you could almost in a way kind of be moving the grief out of the
Absolutely.
body. So when you talk about, spending time with yourself, it kind of sounds more like you are barricading yourself off from others. That's not, when I think of fortifying, I think of like building up that ego strength and kind of who you are again. When I think about people going through breakups, though, usually they tend to become hyper focused, fixated, or obsessed on the person that they've broken up with and or the idea of filling the space with someone else.
Mhm.
How would you help someone refocus on focusing on themselves when the natural tendency is to become hyper focused on either the person you broke up with or a fantasy person to fill that space?
Yeah, that's a very, very typical scenario, I would say. I definitely have done it in my past. Most of the people that I work with are kind of in the same boat. But, I work with people over a series of weeks. And so it's a process. It's not something that you're just gonna wake up the next day and be able to do. And so when we're working on these exercises or here, go reflect on this idea, for example, what does your self-talk sound like all day long? And then just paying attention to, are you saying things about yourself that are supportive or not supportive? Are most of your thoughts, like you said, fixated on the other person or what you wished could have been or what you wished didn't happen? And so it's just our first level is always to bring awareness. What are you currently doing? And is that supporting you or is that holding you back and hurting you? And so once you can identify that level of awareness, that's when we can start to kind of implement a little action step of shifting. So when you notice you're doing it, say, okay, I just noticed that I said something pretty unkind about myself. How can I shift that to be more supportive? And it's just like these incremental practices that you put into place consistently over time that eventually end up, in most cases, end up in a significant inner transformation.
I could see that being especially important for individuals who maybe have left abusive relationships or relationships like they got out. Like it's not just a breakup, it's kind of like they got out
Yeah.
because a lot of those include things like gaslighting, where someone's trying to make you feel like your reality is not your reality, or even second guessing your worth or degrading your worth, like just all the things that would really lead to someone maybe wanting to quote get out. And I'm saying that very distinctly as opposed to just kind of a breakup where people are deciding this just as a mutual thing that's not working. Do you notice, actually, that makes me wonder, do you notice a difference in how people feel when they are acutely fresh from a breakup, when it is kind of a more traumatic get out situation versus a mutual decision between two people?
I absolutely think there's a huge difference. I haven't worked with many people who were in abusive like physically abusive relationships, but there have been a lot of people who have had, the gaslighting and the manipulating or maybe a infidelity. But in general, what you're experiencing when you're coming out of something like that, and even fresh off a breakup, is just a really high stress response. And so, if we're not allowing the stress response to actually complete itself by doing things that calm our nervous system and breathing and moving our bodies and releasing emotions, then you're going to stay at that heightened level of the stress response all the time. And so, it's natural for living beings to go to this heightened state and then come back down to balance. But a lot of times we just stay at the heightened state. And so that's really what I see like when it's fresh or coming from a traumatic experience like that. But when we can do these practices that calm the nervous system, that's how we can start reconnecting with ourselves. Because I find that so much of what we're thinking about and how we feel is just intertwined with the other person and maybe what they thought or felt, that we have to detangle that. And we have to actually say, okay, what is that person's and what is mine? What is true and what is just a narrative that I've been told or that I've believed for a long time. And so it's really rewriting our narratives as well to be supportive and where we want to go versus keeping us stuck where we are.
I could see that being why maybe things like journaling and even going to therapy, for example, but things where you're really purposefully reflecting would be so important fresh off of a breakup, especially because what you just described, is this theirs? Is this mine? What's the true narrative? What's the false narrative? I mean, that is so much to organize, especially when you're in a heightened stress response. I could see something like reflective journaling being, I sometimes joke that I think I journal only when I'm upset. You would think we would bust out our journal to journal about the beautiful times, but, and hats off to anyone here who has a good journaling practice because
Yes.
that is amazing. But I do tend to notice if I look back in my own journal, it's like all these really key painful moments. And I think that there's something to that, that maybe that deep healing that we need in that is what calls us to it.
Yeah, and writing, it's scientifically proven that writing out how you feel or your thoughts, it really does have an impact on your physiology and your ability to process things. So I'm definitely a supporter of journaling. I talk about it often. I published four guided journals of my own to help people with the process.
Oh, awesome.
But in addition to journaling, so something that I found in my own life a while ago, and then I can see now is like there's only kind of so far you can go. Like you can write about, how miserable you feel for so long, but at some point there needs to be an action step that helps you shift.
Right.
So that's where, specifically pinpointed reflective exercises on topics like this is how I help people is, I'll walk them through an exercise where we start to identify, okay, let's take a look a little bit. We don't have to go into too much detail, but let's take a look at your childhood relationships, what your role was in your family. What are some of the coping strategies and patterns that you picked up then? Let's just like explore. Are those showing up now still in your relationships? And most of the time, people are still utilizing those same core strategies that they were when they were younger. And now that they have the awareness, they're like, well, this isn't really working for me anymore. And now you have the agency to shift there. But I call that looking for the familiar, like the familiar patterns, the familiar people that you've been attracted to throughout your whole life. Maybe you're someone who keeps on ending up with, alcoholics or addicts as partners. And then we go back and we're like, well, that, might make a little bit of sense because your mother was an alcoholic. And so that's familiar to you. And so having these specific exercises to reflect on and talk through can really kind of add that extra layer of processing versus kind of just writing about those same feelings all the time.
And there, I mean, science backs up what you're saying about dating the familiar or being drawn to the familiar because
Mhm.
our nervous system prunes away the parts of the brain that it doesn't need. And so if there's parts of the brain that gravitate towards intimacy, deep connection, vulnerability, in a space of calm and peace, those parts get really, really enforced when that's what you're modeled. But if they're not, they're going to be pruned away. They're going to be dying off. And the parts that are more activated, such as survival and excitement and instability, become reinforced. That will, as you're saying, feel more familiar, safer, even if it's not safe. So I think that's a good point to reflect on that. I wonder sometimes also what your thoughts are on, like, if someone reflects on the patterns within their specific relationships and if they continue to date the same type. I remember, I don't even know whose question I was answering for some article for some magazine. I was asked to answer a question about dating against type and the value of it. And I'm curious if you've ever had any thoughts about the value of dating against type, because I think about part of recovering from a breakup is, of course, regulating your body, getting connected to yourself, giving yourself time to date yourself, which we should touch on. Absolutely. Dating yourself. But then I also think about when you are ready to go out into the world and date again. So I'm going to pause us and stop back at dating ourselves, because look, I was almost playing out the thing people do where they break up and they're like, okay, how do I get out into the world again? So let's back the train up. If someone needs to date themselves and slow down so that they can make choices that align with their energy better, what are your favorite ways for someone to date themselves? And how would you even describe what dating yourself means?
Yeah. And you know what? Dating yourself can feel really scary. I just want to put that out there first. It's like, why would I want to date myself? I want to date someone else. Like, I want a companion. I want, someone to do things with. And that's all fine as a desire for you to have. I think dating yourself, first of all, one of the first things I started off by sharing with you here today was building a strong foundation. So, the more that you can implement practices that help you be loving and kind to yourself and get reacquainted with your own values, that gives you the foundation to go out and date yourself because it won't feel as scary. One of the most common kind of things that people share with me is that they are afraid to be alone. And I think this is something that a lot of people experience. And that could be because you might not have a strong foundation in self trust, self worth, self appreciation, and value. So we build the foundation first. And then once we've kind of worked our way up gradually, one of my favorite exercises to give is to design your solo adventure. Now, this could be as small as going to, and for some people this could be big, but going to a different town and just like walking around the downtown area, stopping at a coffee shop and just enjoying your day exploring on your own. Or it could be as big as doing a solo international trip. That's actually something that I did when I was going through a tumultuous relationship. I was in a breakup with this person, and I decided that I was going to go to Spain for 3 weeks.
How
And
very
just,
eat, pray, love of you.
yeah, very. I've listened to a lot of Liz Gilbert lately, actually. But yeah, I mean, so the point is that whatever you choose your solo experience to be, you want to make sure that you're doing it with intention. Like, you're not just, going out for the sake of, like, maybe that's your intention to do something on your
Yeah, I
own.
mean, there's nothing wrong too with just going out to go out, but I get what you're saying if the intention is for growth.
Yeah, and maybe you have a specific intention. Like, for me, like, okay, when I go on this 3-week adventure, it's more than a vacation. I actually want to become more independent and competent. And I did that through figuring everything out myself, reading maps and, doing all the research and all the things. So I did have an intention. And I think that's really helpful. Like, if somebody even just goes to a new city and tries a new cafe, maybe their intention is like, no matter what happens today, my intention is to be at peace just for today. Right? And you're curating an experience for yourself.
I like that because when you consider dating another person, you kind of are, without even knowing it, curating that. I want them to like me, or I want to get to know
Mhm.
them. But sometimes when, I don't know, if I go out and get my nails done, I'm not curating my intention. I'm just intending on fixing my nails. But if it's okay, I think I really have had a lot of time with people and I need alone time and I need to regroup. Maybe I intentionally think, okay, I'm not going to pick up my phone today, or I'm not going to spend any frivolous money. I'm just going to be really in the moment, or just, I'm just making things up with this.
Yeah.
But I like that idea. I like that a lot because sometimes I talk to people about dating yourself and how a lot of it is overcoming the discomfort of being on your own and working through meeting yourself where you're at. If maybe moments of embarrassment come up, if you're by yourself at a cafe and everyone else is with someone, you might have that fleeting self shame thought of, well, I should have someone here. So you meet yourself where that is, you recognize it, and you stay there and you enjoy it and you're in that moment. So I've done so much of that with people, but I haven't taken it so far as to say, preset your intention. That is really beautiful. I love that. And I also love that I can tell you probably did this adventure a while ago because you were using maps
Yes. Well,
as
actually,
opposed to like Google.
that was one of the things that I specifically like had
Unless
in
that
my
was your
intention.
intention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is that I wanted to figure stuff out so that I could feel
Oh,
competent and
okay.
independent. But yeah, it did stem from the fact that I was like horrible with technology and I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna get, service over there. It sounds ridiculous now, but yeah, I
I
agree
get
with
it.
you. I think setting an intention for everything that we do is one of the most important things I think that we can do because if when we don't, we're letting the waves of life, like whatever happens throughout the day, that's where we're getting swept up. Versus, there's been days where I'll go to yoga and I am like, I don't feel like doing yoga today. I just don't feel like it, right? And so my intention for that day for yoga might not be to like do all of the chaturangas or do a great job. My intention for that day might just be to breathe deeply for an hour, the whole class.
That is very challenging and a beautiful intention. And I love, no, and I love that. And, as you're talking, it's getting me thinking that our conversation, it began with me thinking, we're just going to talk about breakups. But what I'm realizing is we're talking about changing your what's called locus of control
Mm.
from external to internal with intention. And so, for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, an external locus of control is when you believe the world happens to you or at you. All these traumas, all these things, they happen, and it creates this sense of disempowerment where you don't necessarily have the ability to influence the things around you. There are things we can't control, of course, but this is kind of a pervasive feeling. Whereas internal is often just you feel you happen to the world. And so that means you feel more empowered, more like you can make intentional decisions about how a breakup looks for you. And it makes me realize if you really think about a breakup, it's probably, especially if it wasn't fully your decision, or even if it was your decision and the whole relationship just imploded or didn't work out the way you dreamed and hoped. It can be one of those feelings in life where it feels like all of your ability to influence your life gets taken away temporarily. Like you just don't have an influence on your well being temporarily. Like that's how heartbreak, I think, can feel. And so I love your idea of setting intentions, going out, living the intention, doing it and feeling it and experiencing it because I think it shifts that locus of control from the world happens to me back to I happen to the world.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad that you put a term to it, the locus of control, because that is exactly how I like to work with people is we're doing it from the inside out. And the first step is we have to get that connection back because everything outside of us is out of our control, like you've been explaining. But I think how this also relates to, people might just want to kind of get themselves ready to be able to date again, right? But when you go in, and this kind of circles back to your question too, around, when you're going in with maybe even an unconscious intention to kind of sit with someone and like have this checklist and be like, oh my God, this person, doesn't meet any of my requirements. And you're asking about like dating outside of your type, right? What if your intention instead is I'm just going to go and see what I can learn from a person that I've never spoken with before? And as soon as you show up, maybe you get that feeling in your belly like, oh, he's not attractive or whatever it is, that judgment
Yeah.
that you get when you first meet somebody. What if you say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that that's my first reaction. And now I'm going to get curious about what I can learn from this person. I bet they have a lot of really interesting stories to share. And we can always learn from somebody. Like everyone has their own storybook. And so if we can approach dating more from a place of curiosity to learn from someone, then you're way more likely to find some commonalities or establish a meaningful connection. Versus, like when someone shows up and just like hits all your check boxes, I don't consider that a meaningful connection. That just means they fit all your check boxes, right? Like, have you ever heard the term like good on paper?
Yes.
But it might not actually be like a good pairing. So having this kind of access to cultivate deeper connection with everyone you come in contact with is going to make you a better dater.
I love that so very much because I'm thinking of so many of my clients right now because I do work with a lot of folks who are leaving abusive relationships and or just trying to figure out how to live and date in a way that they can connect with a secure attachment when maybe they've come from insecurely attached or disorganized attached families. And I think one of the things I notice a lot about my daters, and we probably should touch on online dating a little bit, is that it's almost like if they don't instantaneously feel drawn to someone, they start questioning whether or not it's even worth pursuing. And I think there's always that little nuanced question of, okay, so how do you distinguish between like red flags and someone's not good for you versus I'm not giving him a chance and maybe I'm just not attracted versus, I have an issue with attachment. Instead of trying to pick which bucket you're struggling with, I like the idea of letting go of expectations, looking at the dating experience as curious, adventurous journey, just seeing what happens. And then it feels like it would be more natural, like it wouldn't feel so forced.
And people do this all the time, even outside of dating situation. I mean, I catch myself doing it and I'm very aware of, these kinds of practices, but it's the same exact thing as like, let's say you walk into a room, a networking event or something. What's the first thing you do? You look around and you're like, I want to talk to that person and that person and that person. I don't want to talk to that person. He or she does not look interesting, right? And it's like we make all these snap judgments right
Right.
off the bat. And yet, let's say this person who you didn't want to talk to, comes up and starts a conversation. In your head, you're like, oh, how long am I going to be here for or something? In that moment, you make a decision. Okay, I am talking to this person right now. That's the reality. Let me be present with them. And most of the times you will discover you have things in common. A, this person is wicked cool. There's a Boston term for you.
And
And
upstate New York, we use Wicked also.
yeah, and yeah, it just if you are inquisitive and truly curious, naturally, not like being genuine here, I'll bet you'll walk away with some really fascinating stories.
It's funny when you said networking, my inner HSP was like networking.
Yeah.
So many people I tell this to don't believe me when I say this. I love socializing. I love get-togethers and parties, and I love times where we are all intentionally together for a reason, podcasting, therapy, you name it. But having to go into a room where you're like having a forced experience is so unappealing to me that I have literally never once gone to a networking event in my entire career, almost on purpose. But it makes me think about dating because a lot of dating can feel like that. Like I remember going on a date in between. I had a long-term relationship from college. We moved, to North Carolina together. Didn't work out. We're not married. I'm married to someone else. But the kind of year in between, I looked at dating similar to how you are, where I was just like, I'm just here for the adventure. I wasn't super fixated on the outcome. It was just kind of, and I also have to say, I almost purposely inserted this mantra that anyone would be lucky to date me. And I did that. I'm so happy for myself at that time that I said that to myself because it did reframe the way I put myself out there because it wasn't in a way to satisfy or appease someone else. It was in a way to see, do you match with my true self? I didn't really realize I was doing all that at the time. I was in my 20s. But I remember going on this one date where it felt like networking. It felt so awkward and uncomfortable. And we were in this super fancy restaurant, and I literally dropped my fork like 7 times. I couldn't even like my I couldn't I was so bumbly and uncomfortable, and it was a very quiet restaurant, so it looked like a terrible episode of Seinfeld or something. It was just so mortifying. Didn't work out obviously, but it makes me think of what you're saying though, that if I could have gone back to myself at that time and just been like, take a deep breath, get in your body, and just get curious. Doesn't matter if this works out, doesn't matter where this goes. I think those are really, I love that. I love that you put that out there with the people you work with. I think that's really important.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I do want to also kind of bring to light that it's not always easy because we do have all
Yeah.
these reactions and these judgments of people. And it's just kind of a part of it being human. So you don't have to judge yourself if you're judging someone else. You just notice that it's happening. But, I've even noticed that even just this past, I went to Florida on vacation and I was sitting by the pool and then this couple came and kind of sat next to us, me and my boyfriend, and they were older, and right off the bat it's like, oh, like we're gonna have to be quiet, like what am I, what are we gonna have in common, like are they gonna talk to us the whole time, like you have these thoughts that just come in your head automatically. And then once I just kind of allowed myself into conversation and was like, you know what, I'm going to enjoy this conversation, man, that is when you start finding out really interesting, fun stories. And I mean, we enjoyed chatting with each other for the rest of the afternoon. And so, if we can approach dating in a similar way, I know it's a bummer when you go to the trouble of going on a date and then it's not a person that you like, or
Yeah.
they end up being a dud. Like
Especially
it
if you've
is,
done it time and
oh
time
my
and
gosh,
time
yeah, it's
again.
tiring and it's
Draining.
disappointing. And so I feel you. Like I've been there for sure. But it does make it a little bit more enjoyable if you're coming at it from, this is just another human,
Yes.
there's no check boxes. I'm just going to see how I feel when I'm interacting with this human and if it feels good or not.
Now, I do think it is, I think because I work with people who have come from abusive relationships and or, highly sensitive people are more prone to being taken advantage of also by emotionally manipulative people because of our level of empathy. We are very appealing to narcissists because of our ability to deeply feel for other people. So I do think I love your idea of going in without, too much expectation, just connecting with the moment, being curious. And then I do want to add as a side note, despite just how you're feeling, I do think it still is important to check back in on the check boxes to make sure that, certain non-negotiables that you have decided to set in place are actually being met because you do deserve, I believe, to have someone that makes you feel safe, have someone that, meets the standards that maybe were not met by your previous relationship.
1000%. Yes, I think it's a combination of the two. I
Or,
actually walk the people that I work with through what I call my relationship cheat sheet, and it has 4 quadrants. And so the first quadrant is about really reflecting on what your core values are. And that's part of the kind of reconnecting with yourself piece before you kind of jump back into the dating world. The second
I like
quadrant
that.
is yes, go ahead and make that checklist. These are all the qualities that I would like to have in someone. These are all the qualities that are non-negotiable or that I would not like to have. Those are more kind of like the logical parts of, this whole process. Quadrant 3, which speaks to one of your earlier questions about how do we identify red flags, is how do I want to feel as consistently as possible from day to day when I'm spending time with this person. Now, this quadrant really helps when people are like super attracted to someone right away because that clouds everything else. And
Yes.
so if you're like, oh, well, how I feel when I'm with them is I'm like, I'm like, oh, I'm excited. I'm like all these
Right.
things. But those are just different forms of like feeling anxious.
True.
So,
True.
and chemistry is important, but when you think about how you want to feel independent of that person every day, most people tell me, well, I want to feel peaceful. I want to feel content. I want to
True.
feel confident. I want to feel happy. And so they forget about those things when they're dating, because what they're telling me is like, well, this person makes me feel confused. This person, I mean, that's the opposite of secure and peaceful, right? This
Right.
person, doesn't really listen to how I feel. They kind of dismiss how I feel. Well, that's not really feeling, heard or seen. So that's quadrant 3, and it's consistently over time. And then quadrant 4 is you become an observer. So, yes, you can get wrapped up in it, but then at some point, I need you to take a step out of it. And I just need you to observe what the actual behavior has been from this person versus the words that they're saying to you. Because I know that is a common thing for, narcissistic behavior is like they'll say a lot of things that can be manipulating, or, you need to be able to observe if the words are matching the actions and paying attention to your body throughout the whole
Right.
thing.
Right. What was quadrant 3 one more time? Because I wanted to ask you something about that one.
Yeah, it's how do you want to feel as consistently as possible when you're in relationship with anyone in general
I
over time.
love that. I love that so, so much because so many of my disorganized attached clients, and even, I mean, I'm thinking of friends and whoever, I think they get disappointed or turned off when the initial spark is not really super intense.
Mhm.
But if they, kind of stick in over time, recognize that it's actually a really secure, healthy relationship. I love that idea of not just how do you want to feel initially, but how do you want to feel in the long term. I've never framed it that way to them before, and I'm going to. I have I have all these clients popping in my mind right now that I'm like, I can't wait for our next session.
It's completely free, the download, so.
Oh, well, yeah. And if you haven't sent that to me already, please do because I'll make sure it's available in the show notes so that
Oh,
anyone
great.
listening can
Yeah.
check it out.
It's one of my favorite tools, honestly. Like people love it
Yeah.
just because it's like nice and, 4 quadrants, and
Right.
then it comes with a mini guide too. It's
Oh,
pretty comprehensive.
nice.
It's like the 3 problems that prevent people from being in unfulfilling or toxic
Gotcha.
relationships and how to overcome them.
Right. We all love a chart.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that the dating against type, though, is distinguished because I did mention it and then I don't think either of us ever said exactly what that is. I want to be clear that against type doesn't mean that you're moralistically dating against type. Like you're not going to purposefully find someone who doesn't check your values boxes. But what I notice is, for instance, I have a client who has consistently dated men in the military. That's all she dates. And the same reason why it is not working out seems to consistently have connection to their lifestyle. And so, what I was talking with her about one day, and I'm kind of giggling because she was just totally not impressed with some of my suggestions, where I was saying, what about teachers? What about, I'm just bringing up different professions. And that's kind of what I mean about dating against type. There's things that maybe aren't actually connected to values, and maybe profession is for you, but something where maybe it's someone who's taller than you would normally like, or someone who maybe has a different job or lives 10 minutes further than you put your radius on your dating apps. That's what I meant about dating against type, just stretching the limits a little bit because you might surprise yourself.
For sure. I agree with that. I'm really glad that you took a moment to clarify, because I do think it is important for us to have already reflected on our what we want and what we don't want, and our negotiables, our non-negotiables. I think initially we were kind of having a discussion around how to not be so rigid with that coming in that it is like a job interview, right? It doesn't make dating enjoyable. But that's why I have, the cheat sheet, is it is important to have an idea of what that looks like. And also having another huge important piece, like you said that you did, is the situation, having a very clear knowledge of what value you bring to a relationship. A lot of people I work with, when I ask them this, they cannot identify more than like 1 to 3 things. And I say we're going to sit here and we're going to continue to identify all of the things that you bring into this, because that helps shift the perception of, am I good enough for this person? Is this person going to choose me? Is this person going to like me? You walk in with a completely 180 mindset of, what do I think about what this person is saying and how they're behaving?
Yes.
I know I bring a lot of value. I don't know if I'm really seeing that today from this person. And so I think that's a really important piece as well.
I like that because I think too many people try to prescribe time frames. Like I once heard something funny like for every month you were with someone, it takes a week of recovery, or I don't know, all these weird, kind of formulations of how long it takes to recover from a breakup. But from what you're saying, and just from my experience, it seems more to me like if you take the intention that you were discussing earlier to spend time with yourself, spend time with your friends and family too, that maybe you haven't been spending as much time with, deepening other relationships. So you have that like positive feedback about your ability to be in relationship, even not romantic ones. The more you're doing that, I agree with you. I almost feel like the time frame is not a time frame. It's more so when your shift goes from what do they want to what do I want. Like when you feel that very intentional shift, to me it feels like, all right, now you're ready.
Yeah, and I get asked that question a lot is like how long should I wait? Like, just like you're saying after a breakup. And I think it's a lot less about time versus your inner state. You know, and I'm really, really glad that you also brought up like the connecting with other people in your life, like your friends and your family. Because when I say like doing all this inner work, you don't have to be doing it alone. Yes, you need to take responsibility for your own reactivity and response to the world and to your circumstances, but that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. There's
Right.
so much value in connecting with other people who are going through similar experiences. But I would also advise not to just connect with other people who are heartbroken, because then that could, make you maybe stuck there. Also connect with people you see, doing things that maybe you want to strive to do. Maybe you always wanted to learn a language. Okay, well, now go
Oh,
and
yeah.
broaden your social network to include more people like that. I know in the past when I was really struggling, I was very intentional about wanting to bring new female friendships into my life so I would have a larger network. And so that was something I was actively focusing on. And so I think it's definitely kind of the three legs of a stool. Actually, I have a shelf that I call L3 philosophy, which is love yourself, love your relationships, love your life. And those are like the three legs of the stool. So, yes, you start with your inner self first, but that ripples out into your relationships, make deeper connections, and that's going to make a more fulfilling and thriving life.
I like that image too because I think that might be a good image to use for someone who's contemplating a breakup.
Mm-hmm.
If the relationship you're in destabilizes one of those legs, for instance, if your relationship doesn't allow you to love yourself, that's one of the first warning signs I try to tell people to recognize in abusive relationships or toxic relationships. If it feels like you can't be your best version of yourself or even connected to the self, if you feel that disconnection from the self, and maybe the person is not encouraging your independence and connection to the self, that's a very good sign that this relationship is highly toxic. And so that's a good visual that is destabilizing one of those legs.
And what you're saying too is like if you are thinking of maybe breaking up with someone or it's coming, how kind of prepared are you in these other areas of your life? Like what kind of net do you have to help catch you? A lot of people that come to me, they're saying like, well, I don't really have, like for example, people who have been married for 30 years or something. They're like, well, all of my friends were our friends. And so now that we're divorced, like I don't have anyone. Another example is they don't have any hobbies that they like to do on their own. And so, how can you start? You don't have to be like at 100%, but like if you're thinking about it, how can you start to expand in these different areas so that when you do experience the break, you have these other pieces of the stool that have already been kind of in building mode?
I love that so much because you can do that whether or not you're contemplating a breakup. It's so much more crucial if you are, but it's also, I guess, crucial even if you're not, because in a way it's preventing a breakup most likely. Because when we see the other person as everything, when they are the source of our well-being, that doesn't stabilize that connection to self that you're talking about. So I really do love that. And that is where I find myself with quite a few of my clients who are stuck in the abuse cycle and or stuck in a toxic cycle and they don't know whether or not to leave. I've even had clients come in and apologize to me that they're not leaving. And I try to remind them, I am here for your journey, and this journey can take a very long time. Let's instead work on your relationship with you, to your point, what you're saying, because if and when you are ready to make that break, it's so much easier. And again, getting back to the point, if someone doesn't allow you to do those things, if they're preventing you from going out and making friends or getting a job or spending any of your shared money on things that would bring you joy, that's not a good sign. And so it's interesting to see the very things that can help you heal from a breakup in between relationships are the very things that actually should be in place all the time in a healthy relationship.
I 100% agree with that. And it's one of the things that I learned, from the past of going through devastating breakups and not having those things in place for myself. There was a point where I guess you could call like my turning point. And I was like, I'm never going to allow myself to kind of get into this position again. And so, a long time ago, I decided that I was always going to make relationships of all kinds a priority in my life. I mean, I am going to continuously rotate through, connecting with each of my friends every single month to make sure that I have strong friendships. I'm going to stay connected with my family. I'm going to continue. You know what? This is another thing. I think a lot of people limit the idea of how many people they can know, or they're like, oh, I don't need any more friends. I already have, like three good ones. like,
Mhm.
like I encourage you to question that because, everybody evolves throughout their life. And
Mhm.
sometimes naturally friendships will wax and wane. Some will even fall away. And
Right.
so the more you can stay open to newer friendships as well as you continue to grow and evolve,
Mhm.
it makes your web, your life that much richer. And so,
Mm.
yeah, you should be working on all of these things no matter if you're in a relationship or not.
Right. And I can see how that would really help highly sensitive people to be mindful of that because a good portion of highly sensitive people, about 70%, are introverts. And introverts don't necessarily always need or feel drawn to having an army of friends, but they really do value a smaller network of friends. But I love how you were reminding listeners that just because you have your close network of friends doesn't mean that as you evolve and change, other relationships may naturally form, and being open to the potential of them can be really healing. And I do think it's important also to note that it's natural and normal for HSPs to take a little longer in this process, just like we take longer with almost any decision. HSPs can sometimes tend to take longer to get to the breakup and then sometimes longer to recover. I've had plenty of my HSP clients come into sessions really upset and questioning their worth because I don't want to say non sensitive, their lower sensitive or moderately sensitive ex has already gone off and met someone else. And statistically, I have seen HSPs normally are much more conscientious and I don't want to say picky, but a little bit more intentional, and they take a little bit longer to figure out, okay, what do I actually want for my next relationship? So if you are highly sensitive and you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, okay, this is great, but this is going to take me 5 years, I hope and assure you it won't, but it is natural for it to take a little longer.
Yeah, and if people are watching and they're thinking, oh, I mean, he's probably just an extrovert, like she doesn't really know what it feels like. I actually consider myself to be an introvert, and it took a lot of my own inner work to be able to open myself up to be more available for relationships. And I think part of that process has been I've seen this in my life, but also in other people's lives. It's like, let's say you have just, that tight group of three friends, right? You can't like put the pressure on them for your plan. Let's say they're not available for Saturday, right?
Right.
What are you going to do then? Yeah, like you're putting all of your weight on someone else almost. I don't know if I'm phrasing this right, but
No, I get that. Yeah.
basically, yeah, like the more you can have, I don't want to call them options, but like the bigger your network is,
Right.
the more opportunity you have to be out in the world with people who you actually want to be spending time with. And it doesn't mean you have to be spending time with a lot of people at once, because when I make plans, I usually only make it with like one person at a time, because being in a group is overwhelming for me and I don't find it as enjoyable.
I like that because it's still honoring like your natural tendency. But also, I do notice that if you have, say, one single or three, we're using three, so we'll go with three. The three most important people in your life, I've noticed when, and this probably happens in intimate relationships because of this, when someone becomes more important to you, they can tend to disappoint you more. Like there's more kind of you take it more personally if something doesn't work out. So to your point, if you're really, really wanting to get out of the house and go on an adventure and none of your people are available, it can be helpful to have people at different levels. They don't necessarily need to be three besties that you're going to go out and do something with, but maybe other people that have shared interests, or what you said earlier, someone who is doing something or living life in a way that you admire. So, my goodness, I could continue talking about this forever. Honestly, there's so many different tangents that my mind is going. Shocking as an HSP, but not. But I just have been so grateful for this conversation. I'm so excited for listeners to hear this, especially during a time where maybe they're contemplating a breakup, maybe they've just gone through it, or maybe they're in the dating phase. So, you have a lot of really great resources. Where can people stay connected to you, access these resources? And then what would be one last thing you just really would love for them to try today to help themselves
Mm,
feel better?
yeah. I think one thing that you can try today is really thinking about what would feel the most supportive to me right now. If it's relaxing, being peaceful, then do something that relaxes you. If it's I feel lonely and I need to feel connected, reach out to, one of your besties or a family member, or, go make a new friend. But identifying just your very next steps is really important, because trying to figure out how you're going to deal with the whole entire thing can feel really overwhelming.
Yes, that's very good advice. I totally agree. And then where can they stay connected to you and keep up with your offerings?
Yeah, wonderful. I would love to connect with you, and I can be found at Emmi, Emmi Fortin, Fortin, on pretty much most of the social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And then I also have the relationship cheat sheet guide, which is a free download that people enjoy. And then I have a YouTube channel where I have my show L3 Philosophy, which is all sorts of tools and personal stories from people who are just trying to L3 through their life, love themselves, love their relationships, and love their life. So I've got a wonderful, robust newsletter that would be great if you want to subscribe to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emmy. Thank you for coming. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And take the time to connect with yourself intentionally, date yourself, and or give that next date a chance. Be well, everyone.
Thank you.